For having this very important hearing. Generally speaking, I'll ask some questions, but I think it's important to say that if government action and good intentions lowered housing costs, and you looked over the last period of time, housing should be free, given how many initiatives government has put in place to lower housing costs, not ironically. Dr. Glazer, you live in Massachusetts. I lived in Massachusetts for 12 years. It's more rare to find a Republican at Harvard than it is to find a Republican writ large in Massachusetts. And the ranking member talked about how housing costs for that school teacher. I'm very familiar with that. I ran a large group of car dealerships that sold cars to school teachers, and they kept living further and further away from Massachusetts to the point where a lot of people lived in New Hampshire that worked in Massachusetts. And it's interesting because I think if you're looking at how do you solve housing problems, I would headline it as do the opposite of Massachusetts, which is massive government intervention in public markets, private markets that should be allowed to work. My question for you, Dr. Glazer, is this. In 2019, if you made $59,000 a year, you could afford a home as defined by your income was less than 30% of your mortgage payment. Today, that number is almost approaching $110,000. Just 5 years. What happened?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your care on this topic. I want to just first respond to your comment on Massachusetts land use regulations, which is I have long thought it's deeply ironic that red state Texas does such a better job of providing affordable housing for ordinary people than blue state Massachusetts does. And I think it is exactly the issue of local land use regulation, all of which is very well intentioned, all of which had consequences that were deeply harmful for ordinary people trying to buy homes. The change in affordability reflects two things, right? It reflects both the price of housing and the mortgage rates. And I'm not a banking or a macroeconomist. I study housing markets. I study cities and other places. So I'm not going to run down the litany of mistakes that my macroeconomist colleagues think that got us into the point where mortgage rates are currently what they are. That's not my business. But that is a big part of it. The other part of it that I am happy to talk about is the fact that housing is so much more expensive than it should be. And I think this is an issue in which it used to be about coastal areas. And now it is increasingly in Sunbelt cities where the inner ring areas have made it harder and harder to build. And you used to see patterns in places like Atlanta where we built much more in the pricier parts of Atlanta in the 1970s and 1980s. Now we don't. Now we build in the lower density areas that are away from things. And so I think this is no longer just a Massachusetts issue. And that's in some sense what scares me about it, is the places that were the escape valves for affordable housing in the U.S., the Houstons, the Atlantas, the Miamis, they're not turning into escape valves anymore. And that just scares me. And that's why I think having some national discussion, having some, even if it is largely symbolic, is just really important to recognize that we're going in the wrong direction as a country if we want to be a place where outsiders can come and forge a brighter future.
Yeah, I mean, when you see an 80% increase in an income requirement over a 5-year period of time to afford a home, you got to look at it and say, what happened during that 4 or 5 year period? Could it be that we let 10 million illegals come into this country? I mean, would that incredible surge in demand with no correlating supply increase, could that have something to do with it? Do those 10 million people have to be having to be housed raise the price of housing generally?
So again, I'm not an expert on immigration policy in any way.
But you know supply and demand 101. I assume that's a criteria for becoming a Harvard professor.
Indeed. I think I'm just going to repeat what I said in my original testimony, which is we know things are a demand problem when you see quantities and prices both up. You know things are a supply problem when you see prices up and quantities down. What we have seen in the U.S. over the last 15 years is prices are way up and building quantities are way down. And that is why I think it is crucial, like the one fact to take away from this is a supply problem. It is fundamentally not about housing demand.
Well, again, 10 million people that need to be housed is a problem. Mr. Jelinek, on the mortgage world, because this is also the Banking and Housing Committee, what are some things that you think could be done from an innovation perspective to help alleviate this problem?
Senator, thank you for the question. It's sort of it's the mirror image of the discussion we've been having on housing, just applied to the mortgage side of it, right? There's as long as we are careful with the innovations we implement and the ways we test them, there are a lot of ways we can use new technology and big data to reduce some costs in the process. So I could go into those if you'd like.
Yep, please.
Certainly. So, whether it's, and some of this was in my testimony, and these are just some examples, right? But I guess I'll give about 10 seconds on the core of our business. I mean, we exclusively work with independent mortgage brokers that are small town businesses across all 50 states. The reason why we are dedicated to serving the wholesale channel and working with mortgage brokers only is because they are generally the lowest cost way for a consumer to get a loan. And they're embedded in their communities, and whether it's rural, whether it's urban, they know the market better than anyone else. So our whole existence is about being a low-cost provider. You can even see that we're a public company, in our margins compared to some of our competitors that have a different business model. So everything we do is about technology and process and efficiency. So some of the things that we have now available to us, we have incredible data and analytics tools in the appraisal realm. There's more data now that Freddie and Fannie have, and there's more tools that we have where we might be able to increase accuracy of appraisals and reduce costs of appraisals. And it's a small number relative to some of the housing supply issues we're talking about, but these numbers start to add up. I could say the same thing for the mortgage insurance or the title space, and these are all areas where they're very necessary. But if you start to look at premiums collected and, ultimately when the premiums need to be paid out, there are opportunities to provide alternatives where you don't have any, don't increase the systemic risk, don't increase lender risk, don't increase consumer risk, but you're just leveraging modern day technology and innovation, in some cases even AI, to just reduce cost out of, what is a complicated and often legacy oriented process, the mortgage process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, he's gone.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, and thank all of you for your